Welcome to a Tech Moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Christina Etter. In this podcast, we take just a few minutes to talk about some of the exciting science and technology that's changing and shaping the cannabis and hemp industries. And a topic that is near and dear to my heart is in regards to how cannabis can help people with pain. Now, according to recent studies from the CDC, or recent numbers from the CDC, opioid overdoses last year were up 54%, and most of that was due to a spike in fentanyl overdoses. Overall, the data has shown that the total overdose deaths hit a record 93,000 people in 2020. 28 states saw increases of more than 30%. Now, my husband very easily could have been one of those statistics back in 2015, but we dropped everything. We picked up, we moved to Colorado, and we used cannabis to help end a 10-year opiate addiction that he suffered due to spinal issues. So, like I said, this is a topic that's super near and dear to my heart. But today we have researchers that are working so diligently to put science behind the anecdotal stories like my husband's and behind the claims that cannabis really can be an alternative to some of these more dangerous opioids and drugs out there for pain control and pain management. So today I am super thrilled to welcome the very first cannabis manufacturing license holder, Doug Chloupek, who is also the CEO and founder of Juva Life, and they are working on high-grade pharmaceutical solutions in the cannabis realm. Now, Doug and his team of researchers have recently discovered a non-cannabinoid molecule inside the cannabis plant that has incredible potential for inflammation. So Doug, welcome to the show. I am super excited to talk about some of these discoveries that you and your team have been finding with cannabis.
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm super excited to dive into the science of what we really want to talk about today. But before we go into all of that, you have an extraordinary history with the cannabis industry, and I would love if you would just take a moment and tell our audience about how you came into the industry, where this all started, and what led up to the creation of Juva Life.
Sure, absolutely. It's definitely not my first rodeo, I'll say that. I've commercially operated in the California cannabis space for going on 13 years, so well over a decade. I've operated here in the SB 215 and 420 days, and all the way through. We've literally started and operated every aspect of the commercial cannabis supply chain, from cultivation, distribution, manufacturing, retail stores, brands. Had a couple of retail stores in the city of San Jose and helped craft their legal regulatory ordinances. So it started involving being very political, running one referendum, co-chairing 2 initiatives to rewrite operational laws. Started the very first manufacturing center, as you mentioned, cannabis manufacturing and research in 2016, issued by the city of Berkeley. It's literally permit 1 ever issued in the state of California. And going through that over the last decade has really opened the eyes to understand that we need real science. We have to move beyond the anecdotal compounds, anecdotal information that we all have at our access. I've seen thousands, tens of thousands of patients, and that's not sufficient. We know it works. We know it's safe. We know it doesn't cure everything, and it treats and helps people with lots of things. So we now are moving beyond what we know as anecdotal information and moving into the true science of really unlocking the mysteries of cannabis, who it works for, how it works, what's the mode of action, the mechanism of action, the disease target state, and how do we progress that forward into a true pipeline to unlock the science of the cannabis plant. And that's really the core mission of Juva and what we're doing here.
That's fantastic. And like I stated in the introduction, it is so important to put this science behind the claims. Like you said, there are lots of people in my husband's shoes. It absolutely amazed me to watch what he was able to do, because he literally walked away from his addiction, and we did this solely with the plant. And it was so amazing to me. And that's, really what kind of motivated me to change careers and do the things that I do today. But you're right. We're not going to get the acknowledgement that it deserves until we have the scientific studies that can prove what the stories are claiming. So it's definitely fascinating to me. Now, when you launched Juva Life in 2018, tell me a little bit about what your motivation was for launching this new company.
You know, you kind of hit right on the head of it. There are so many people in the world today in positions similar to your husband's, and many times worse off, taking many other types of painkillers, opiates, and pharmaceutical drugs. So at the end of the day, we have historically known for thousands and thousands of years that we have Eastern medicine, we have Ayurvedic healing, we have indigenous healing. They used plants and herbs and compounds that the planet provides over thousands of years in understanding how they compound these medicines, and they have a beneficial effect in the human body. We in Western society just look at drug development from the polar opposite side to say, it might work, but how do you replicate, 13 barks, 2 roots, this flower species, and a little bit of pollen from over here, and all of a sudden your psoriasis is cleared up? And that's just not the way Western medicine is done. And so that was really the problem. The problem was really, how do we bridge this gap? And I'm not a scientist. I would almost call myself more of the CDC. I'm a chief dot connector. I know how to put the right people in the right seat on the bus and really drive the mission home. And coming from the cannabis industry, I really had, I hate to say it, I almost had a preconceived notion. I had a notion that there's the Entourage Effect, there's the whole plant medicine, cannabis works for, higher CBD things for these neurologic issues, different types of cannabinoid ratios for different types of ailments. Again, all anecdotal. And I took this, my preconceived notion of anecdotal, and said, how do we unlock the mystery of cannabis? How do we bridge that gap? And so I set out on the mission to really create a company that was a transformative company. I took non-cannabis industry professionals, leading scientists, clinicians, researchers in their respective fields, and then brought them into what I had as a vision. And, just like everything in life, it had to be fluid. I thought that we were going to take this combination of cannabinoids, unlock this mystery, use this anecdotal approach, and come up with some formula for all intents and purposes. And leading and letting my real science and researchers and clinicians do what they really do best, that's not what it availed itself to. I came in with a little bit of blinders. They came in as the chief resident oncologist from Good Samaritan Hospital, who's the current president of Targeted Medical Education, as the educators of clinical educators, who sits on the clinical advisory board to the White House for pandemic treatment of oncology, and the former president of the U.S. Breast Surgeons Society of America, Dr. Peter Beisch, who sits on my research advisory panel, and Dr. Sanjeev Gangwar, who leads my vice president of chemistry, who has 45 published patents in inflammation and oncology, and he was the former director of oncology and chemistry for Bristol Myers Squibb, who's developed many of the pharmaceutical drugs, as he's the key inventor of many that you see commercialized in the world today. They specifically came aboard because we had a new and novel approach to unlock the mysteries of cannabis, to take a pharmaceutical drug development pathway bridged with what we anecdotally already know, and how do we bridge that gap, match it in the middle, distill the complexity of the cannabis plant down into something that we can easily replicate, do in vivo, in vitro assays, show clinical efficacy in the lab, and then take that through and use that piggybacked with our research registry, which we can touch on in a minute. So that was a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but that's really what was the driving force, and we have found some amazing discoveries.
Well, that is absolutely the perfect segue into my next question, because now I really want to dive into, the meat and potatoes of what you guys are discovering over there. And from what I've understood from the press releases and things that I've seen, is that You're really starting to uncover that a lot of the therapeutic potential in cannabis goes beyond the cannabinoids and beyond the terpenes and beyond these molecules that we're mostly familiar with from cannabis. So I'd love to have you dive in and tell us a little bit about what your team discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've coined these two discoveries, Juva-019 and Juva-041, and they are moving through their clinical drug development pathway. That might be the technical way of saying we found some really cool things in cannabis that are not cannabinoids. So it's not a THC or a CBD or a CBG or a CBC or any of the known cannabinoids. Nor is it a terpene like the myrcenes or the limonene or any of the other terpenes that typically give the associated effect. So what we basically and anecdotally understand is that the effects, aromatherapy is a big cause of that. The effects of the terpenes and cannabinoids together give you, whether that's sedative, euphoric, sleepy, hungry, munchy, whatever those are. But we didn't necessarily know, and the Entourage Effect starts to talk about the combination of cannabinoids together are what are needed. And we know that if you have CBD in an isolate form versus you have a whole plant derived CBD with its monoterpenes and light molecular weight terpenes and full profile, that you're going to have a greater benefit. The real question is why? Why? Is it all of the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the combination of all of them, which is what we understand as the Entourage Effect, and I know that to be true, and I've lived that since I've used cannabis. But what we have identified is that specifically for inflammation, controlling the inflammation pathways or the cytokines in the human body that trigger inflammation, which is at the heart, the root of almost every disease that's affecting mankind right now. It's a $95 billion global health issue is inflammation. Juva-019 specifically regulates 2 of the primary inflammation pathways in the body. Juva-041 regulates 8 of the primary inflammation pathways in the human body. And the clinical potential of these are what we are now moving forward in this drug development. So they are not scheduled substances. They are not illegal on any level. They are easy to reproduce. They initially are showing great activity, and that's why we're moving them forward through our development pathway.
I love it. And I love that you're also taking into consideration the things that we've learned about Entourage Effect and combining these compounds. I can tell you from experience, my husband has tried about every cannabis product available in the state of Colorado, specifically for that reason, is because he's always looking for that blend that works well for him. And so, and unfortunately, a lot of times in the industry, you get that one good product that works great for a little while, but then after a while, it doesn't work anymore, or they change their formulation, and all of a sudden, it's not any better. Or we've even had companies go out of business where he was getting good products that worked well for him. So it's always, for me, from the consumer aspect, it's difficult sometimes to hunt down that perfect product. And so when I'm hearing about companies like yours that are working on developing ways to make those effects more consistent, it's very, very exciting for me, just because it sounds like it's going to solve a lot of problems that go through some of the same things that my husband has.
It really will. And one thing that we haven't even really touched on is we have a patient research registry that is approved by the Western Institutional Review Board, which is overseen by the FDA, for up to 2,000 patients to utilize cannabinoid products not manufactured by Juva. These are commercially available. We have one hemp CBD product nationally available, and the others are THC infused products here available in California. That up to 2,000 patients with 6 specific ailments can take the products. They have physician oversight. It's HIPAA compliant. They register through a phone-based app, and that tracks their effects, their usage, how it uses. They have physician and survey oversight. This, in essence, is a groundbreaking research registry that at the end of this is quantitative data that is validated, white paper, able to be published in white papers, and creates a baseline for best-in-class products against very specific ailments, and if they do or don't work, and at what dosage, and for what type of health conditions are associated or related to those said patients. While that is currently happening, and pain is one of those, and I believe your husband had some pain issues. So pain is one of those with 3 separate delivery methods and 3 different formulas. Once this is done and that's completed, our chemistry department is simultaneously running on the same parallel path, that at the conclusion of the initial research registry, we'll have the safety and the toxicology data back from the in vivo and in vitro assays that we're currently running. And we're waiting for the final bit of regulatory, but it looks like we should be able to take the formulated product, once shown safe for human use, back into the research registry for the same set of issued conditions, and then have a like by like comparative of the new formulated molecules in humans for the same conditions, based against what we previously have best-in-class products. And that is really the goal of Juva, is not to take a product to end consumer FDA approval, but get it through safety, human profiling, and get it into humans to show that the lab works in real life applications. And then that's an accelerator for one of the pharmaceutical companies to take this through full commercialization, which is really the next kind of phase of Juva.
Right. And isn't it amazing? Obviously our show is called A Tech Moment, and isn't it amazing how much technology has been able to provide that platform? So we can collect that kind of data, and so people can, start to share their experiences. We can, collect all of that information, quantify it, like you said, and it's amazing to me just how much technology really has played into, helping to prove and helping to show just how many people really can be and are being helped by consuming cannabis. But now I want to take that just one step further, though, because one of the things that I read in your press releases is that you are prepping for full clinical trials. So talk to me a little bit about that process, and what is it that you're hoping to learn from those studies that you're preparing for?
So there's a couple of things that you've recently read about. One of the next steps in the development, and we've actually completed the study, which I can't announce the results quite yet, but you'll be seeing about that coming out in the very near future in an upcoming press release, is that we're running the comparative combination and isolate assays currently to see if any of the cannabinoids, known cannabinoids, and some of the terpene profiles either add to and make our individual compound stronger, or if they weaken the compound or they alter its efficiencies. So it's a very, very exciting piece on the drug development pathway to ensure that this is safe and actually clinically effective. In an upcoming press release, we'll have some of the information regarding the combination studies, which are just thoroughly exciting. And as it pertains to the clinical component is advancing each of these stable small molecules forward on their drug development pathway. And as part of that pathway, that shows the toxicology, human safety data, and the efficacy for the specific diseases that we're targeting. Once that's done, as I just mentioned, we're waiting for the final approval from the regulatory component that we will then be able to take this single molecule in its final form back into humans via the research registry. And at the end of that, the data that's associated is in essence like a phase 2A, phase 2B, multi-phase clinical relevance. So we are not doing a multi-phase clinical. So I want to be really clear about that. Those would be like a NIDA approved FDA multi-phase. That is not the intent of Juva. We have created an entirely new, and I guess in par with your show, an entirely new way of progressing pharmaceutical active ingredients, or we believe we have created a new pathway to get to the same end goal. And we've been able to do that in a manner that is orders of magnitude cheaper and faster. And I'll give you an example. Sanjeev, coming from Bristol Myers Squibb, they may have assayed 3 to 10 million compounds to find one that hits on a very specific activity that they then want to research to move through its clinical advancement. And that could be anywhere from tune of 3 to 50 or 80 million dollars in doing so in multiple years. We've done it for a fraction of the cost and in less than 6 months. Getting a product or getting a drug or a developed molecule into a human via the normal process would typically take anywhere from 3 to 7 years and upwards of 200 to 500 million dollars. We are looking at less than 10 to 12 months from today to being able to go back into the research registry. It's because we're not looking to take this through full approval, but we are creating, in essence, a stepping stone for one of the larger pharmaceutical corporations to come in and take over where we're at. And where we'll be is to have human safety data, human safety tox data, and assuming everything pans out as we're planning, it will go back into the research registry in less than a year from now. So it's a different pathway to get to the same end goal, to show real efficacy in humans.
That just makes sense. I have always questioned that process and how long it actually takes to get a new drug, to where it can be useful and how long that takes. And obviously, I think a lot of people have kind of made that correlation over the last couple of years with the pandemic and the creation of the vaccine for the pandemic and how quickly all of that came about. And I think a lot of people that were familiar with cannabis were kind of left scratching their head thinking, now, wait a minute, how did this happen so quickly when cannabis has been out there for decades? And we haven't been able to move forward on it. So I think that it just makes sense to look for this alternative pathway that you talk about and help, really move some of these products forward so people really do have the ability to look into the alternatives without having to wait, another 7 to 10 years for a pharmaceutical company to come back and say, well, yeah, we've tested it. So it makes good sense.
That's just it. You hit the nail on the head, because what we currently know it takes roughly $1 billion to take a product to commercialization through the pharmaceutical industry in 7 to 10 years before it's commercially viable, and roughly 70% of them, once approved, never actually become commercialized. I.e., why we have a disease care state instead of a healthcare state, because we're not really interested in making people really healthy. We're interested in monetizing their disease and treating their symptoms and giving them another pill for another symptom. So what we're looking at is, how do we get to the root? How do we not look at mitigating the pain that's caused by some of your inflammation components? Let's look at the true root of that. The root of that is inflammation. So how do we regulate inflammation? And when we start looking at drugs like Humira and many of these other protein-based inflammatory response drugs, they're not stable at room temperatures. They're protein-based. You have to go to your physician. They're every 2 or 3 week injections, versus something like a stable single small molecule, which is what we've identified. It's like a Tylenol. It's like an Advil. It's stable. It's easy to manufacture. And now we're just taking it through the rest of the stages. And if we can, which our goal here is to basically, as an accelerator, save anywhere from $300 to $700 million and 4 to 7 years off of a clinical pathway for one of the larger pharmaceutical companies to take what we design and develop simply to the next step. And this is applicable in many other forms, it just happens to be cannabis and cannabinoids and small molecules as that we've really dove into, but the application for the platform that we've designed is really broad.
So one of the things that's most exciting about what you just said for me is that since my dive into the cannabis space and into the cannabis industry, that's one of the things that I have said all along, that I feel like we're missing the point in Western medicine, that we are trying to cure a disease or band-aid a disease or an ailment, and we're not looking for that root cause. And I have always felt like that as we learn more about cannabis, as we learn more about the endocannabinoid system and how these compounds work within the human body, I feel like it's going to inevitably change the way that we look at healthcare in the United States, or in the modern world, than how we have in the past. I'm just curious. That's kind of my long-term vision. What's your long-term vision of this? What's your long-term vision for Juva and where this is going to go?
Yeah, I think we are very aligned in that thought process. We treat things very differently in Western society than in many places in the world, and that's really what this came down to. I would love to see a much lower cost, easily available compound that really targets many of society's root diseases at their root, which is inflammation, whether that's pain, whether that's cancer, whether that's many of the neurologic or the shaking or neurologic diseases. Many of them come from inflammation. And at the end of the day, if we can unlock one of the critical mysteries of cannabis, of what actually is it, or what are the things in it that create this positive health effect. And we know CBD is in essence a neuroinhibitor. We're not looking in that vein, but we know that works. That's why you have some, Epidiolex and some of the other FDA approved drugs that are cannabis based. But many of those products they create this massive infrastructure of, millions of square feet of canopy in order to then extract it down, research it, distill it, replicate it. And it's a very foreign concept for how any Western drugs are designed and developed. And that's boding to the entourage effect of all of the other cannabinoids and some of the terpenes in some of these formulas. So what it lends itself to, which is very different here at Juva, is that we believe we have identified two of, there may be many more, but these two have been the most potent at controlling inflammation, Juva-019 and Juva-041, at controlling inflammation in the body. And I would be so happy to see that what we are showing in early in vivo and in vitro assays in the lab play out through the next 6 months and move their way eventually into human, and actually show a pragmatic shift in cannabinoid-based medicines that have science, rigor, reproducibility, and are that next stepping stone to really have something that can benefit society at large at their root cause of some of the main diseases affecting us.
Fabulous. I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is the kind of research, what you're doing at Juva Life, you and your team are doing there, this is what is going to change the perception of cannabis in the long run. Right now we're still dealing with the stigmas of an illicit market and the ideas that all cannabis consumers, are only using cannabis just to get high. And, I've seen firsthand, and I've witnessed the skepticism from a lot of people in the medical field. My husband's doctor, the first year we went back to his doctor up in Minnesota after leaving, his doctor literally sat back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked down his nose, and he went, "Yeah, right," when we told him that cannabis had changed how he was approaching pain and all of the things that, all of the changes that had happened. And so I'm excited for companies like yours to really get involved and start to prove some of these theories and these ideas that cannabis really does have an incredible amount of potential. Maybe not for everybody, but there are certainly people out there that can benefit from these alternatives. And I'm truly, truly thankful for companies like yours, and just, it's exciting to kind of see how things go forward. Now, one more thing before we go, though, that I do want to touch on and give you a chance to kind of speak to is Juva Life is a publicly traded company, correct? Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of that business side of Juva Life and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We went public just about a year ago. We went public in the Canadian Securities Exchange under the ticker symbol Juva, Juva. We're publicly traded on the OTC market in the U.S. under the symbol JUVAF, so Juva F. And then we also publicly traded in the German market in the Börse Frankfurt Exchange. And so with that, we've raised about $34 million to date. We have active and operational channels in every aspect of the cannabis supply chain currently. So we have a 31,000 square foot cultivation facility generating millions of dollars in cultivation and revenue and supplying commercial cannabis to many brands here in California. We have a few delivery businesses in Northern California as well. We have a soon-to-be, we're hopefully being awarded in the next few weeks, hopefully, a retail storefront here. And then we have a big manufacturing campus that's under construction in Hayward. It's a former FDA manufacturing facility that used to grow genetically modified tobacco, of all things, in these greenhouses and extract the plant proteins in the laboratory. So I took that over in 2018 and spent the last 4 years going through permitting. It's been a nightmare, but permitting, development, planning, and we're right at that final phase of approval to then start construction at that facility. So we're truly vertically integrated through the cannabis supply chain, while we're also running this research registry for the 2,000 patients, which I'd love to share a QR code there that any users could any of your followers could participate if they were so interested. And then we have the clinical side, which is what's really, really exciting. If you can't tell, that's really my passion side. So we're this very interesting company, much more of a life science company with an immense knowledge in cannabis that's utilizing the cannabis economics and revenue generation from the cannabis side of the company to fund the research and the drug development and the clinical research component. So it's a very interesting company. I would love to have any of your viewers support us. We're currently trading, as I mentioned, on the OTC at Juva-F. And we have a lot of fun information coming up here in the next couple of months. I can't wait to share with everyone.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have to stay in touch and bring you back here in a few months and see how things are going over there at Juva. In the meantime, I just have to say again, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing over there. And thank you for taking time out of your busy day today just to come be on our show and talk about all of this exciting stuff that's happening over there at Juva.
Well, Christina, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for sharing your story of your husband. There's thousands and thousands of others like him, and hopefully our work will help folks like him and many of the other tens of thousands who need this type of medicine desperately.